All right, welcome back to AI for Cybersecurity. I hope you're having an awesome time so far. Our next speaker is V.S. Subrahmanian. He is the Dartmouth College Distinguished Professor in Cybersecurity, Technology, and Society, and Director, Institute for Security, Technology, and Society. Please join me in welcoming him to our virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be talking today about how we can help enterprises get safer using two novel AI techniques. So 2 case studies on how AI can help companies and CISOs make their organizations safer. The first says, can we predict cyber attacks before they occur? Obviously, every CISO needs to decide what he or she will do today in terms of securing their organization based on the threats they expect to see over the next few weeks or months. Today, most industry CISOs and security organizations wait for something called a CVSS report from the National Institute for Standards and Technology. This report looks at all known vulnerabilities, and for every vulnerability, there's a report that says, here's how severe this vulnerability is going to be. Here's how easy it is for attackers to exploit it, etc. If we take a given vulnerability and plot it on this 2-dimensional scale that you see here on the right, on the x-axis is the time to attack. Is it going to be 30 days from today, 3 days from today, or 200 days from today? And on the y-axis is the severity of the attack, which is measured on a 1 to 10 point scale according to NIST CVS scores. Then we can think of this picture as having 4 quadrants. The vulnerabilities that are very, very severe and immediate are things that the CISO needs to care about right away. The ones that are less severe and immediate, and the ones that are very severe but are likely to occur in the distant future, are perhaps things he can wait on for a little bit, as opposed to these, which he needs to deal with right away. And then things that are less severe but are likely to occur in the distant future, he can perhaps push off to a little later than these two. So this is what a CISO would like to have in his hands today on his screen or her screen, so that they can make these decisions of what vulnerabilities to patch and when to patch them. But unfortunately today, there's a huge gap between the time a vulnerability is first known to NIST and to the MITRE Corporation, which is one of the major authorities to which CVEs are reported, vulnerabilities are reported. And this gap is 132.7 days. So if a new vulnerability is known about today to MITRE, by the time NIST releases its CVSS report on that vulnerability, on average, in a 2-year study that we performed, is 132.7 days. That's huge. But to make matters worse, about half the exploits that leverage the vulnerability known about today happen during this 132.7-day gap. So that's terrible. And by the way, it's not NIST's fault. It's not MITRE's fault. There are a number of reasons for this. But in any case, I think we'd all agree that a CEO who today gets an estimate today or in the next few days of how severe a particular vulnerability will be and when it's likely to be exploited, tomorrow or next month or 6 months down the road, that CISO who's got that information at his fingertips, has those predictions at his fingertip, can make a more informed decision about what to patch today, what to leave off till tomorrow, and what to leave off till next month. And that's really what this work is about. Here's a simple case study of this scenario. So on some day before July 31st, 2017, we don't know exactly when, somebody reported a potential vulnerability in a Microsoft Office memory corruption vulnerability. MITRE Corporation created something called a dictionary entry that is publicly visible on July 31st. So they knew about it on July 31st. And this is a very, very modest entry. It just has 1 line to 1.5 lines about it. On November 14th, they published information about the CVE on their website. It's also the date on which Microsoft released a patch for this vulnerability. So one can assume that during this time frame, Microsoft was doing something about this vulnerability, which is why they released the patch. NIST started this and analyzing this vulnerability at some point. We're not entirely sure when, but on the 5th of December, 2017, the same year, they released their CVSS report on the National Vulnerability Database, which is an incredibly valuable resource containing information about all known cyber vulnerabilities. Here's the bad news. Within a week of the CVE information going up on MITRE's website, it was exploited in an attack by a group called the Cobalt Hacking Group, and it was used not just by them, but by others as well, for stealing password information and other relevant information. What does this mean from the point of view of the attacker? The attacker doesn't even have to discover his own vulnerabilities. He just waits for MITRE's website to say something about the vulnerability and says, hey, I'm going to go poking around with the little information I have to find the real vulnerability. He finds it, and before anybody has had time to even consider this vulnerability and patch it in their respective organizations, they've attacked successfully. That's what we'd like to avoid. At Dartmouth, we've developed a system called VEST, Vulnerability Exploit Scoring and Timing System, which tries to address this issue and tries to come up with early predictions, given a vulnerability that we know about today. When is it likely to be exploited, and how severe is it likely to be? That is, can we predict as soon as possible, within days or just a couple of weeks of our knowledge of a new CVE, can we predict when it's going to be exploited, and can we predict its CVSS score? To do this, we use 4 sources of data, 3 of which are shown here: CVE information, historical CVE information from NIST, discussion on Twitter on different CVEs, including the ones we might want to make predictions on, and intrusion protection signatures from Symantec. We also use information from a source called ExploitDB, which tells us when the exploits occurred. We looked at this for a period of 23 months, almost 2 years. From this data, we extracted several sort of basic features from the Twitter discussion of the CVEs, as well as predicted retweet volumes of tweets talking about different CVEs. But most importantly, we created something called a CAT graph, a CVE author tweet, hence CAT graph. For each node in this CAT graph, a CVE author or a tweet, we compute something called a popularity score. The popularity score of an author is a proxy for his knowledge, ability. How much information, how knowledgeable is this person about CVEs in general? The popularity score of a CVE is a proxy for the amount of information available about it. The popularity score of a tweet is a proxy for how influential this tweet might be. How much might it be reshared, retweeted? How much influence, how many people might it reach? We then build a bunch of sophisticated machine learning models on top of this and come up with a predictive model. Our best predictive model, called Fret Late Fusion, is able to generate predictions that are accurate about when a vulnerability will be exploited to within just under 12 days of the actual exploitation date. And this is done in a way so that CISOs can use it. So if a CISO is looking at a new vulnerability today, and we tell him this vulnerability is likely to be exploited on March 15th of this year, then he is likely to know that it's most likely to be exploited sometime in March, maybe not March 15th, but plus minus 12 days. So let's say all of March. But he also knows that he doesn't need to worry about this tomorrow. Of course, this is not 100% accurate, and there can be errors, but by and large, this would give him justification to say, well, perhaps I can do this next week and deal with a patch for this vulnerability next week, as I've got more immediate things to deal with this week. That's really how we expect the system to be used. VEST, this shows not the entire CAT graph, because 2 years data is quite huge, but the neighborhood of the CAT graph associated with this CVE down here and this CVE down here. The size of the nodes denotes the importance of the nodes. So for example, this CVE node shown here is much more important than this CVE node shown here, according to our popularity scores. This author shown here is much more popular than this author shown here. And so we should perhaps pay more attention to this person than to this person. I'm going to show you also that our VEST system predicts the CVSS scores. As I mentioned, NIST releases a CVSS report on average 132.7 days after the vulnerability is first known, and they assign a score from 1, which means very unimportant, to 10, which is like extremely severe, to every vulnerability. We're able to predict this using 3 days of Twitter discussion data of the CVE to an error of about 1.25. So what this means is that if we predict 3 days after this CVE is discussed on Twitter, we predict that this CVE is going to have a CVSS score of 9. Then this suggests that its CVSS score in reality will perhaps be somewhere between 8 and 10. And this is huge. If you go back to that Microsoft memory corruption vulnerability I talked about earlier, the ability to do this will tell the attacker that perhaps this is a severe vulnerability. And likewise, if the attackers had known that this vulnerability is going to be exploited in, say, 5 days, maybe they'd have been able to patch it before the actual exploit occurred. We're also able to predict CVSS subscores. Things like, what is the kind of attack vector we're coming at? What is the attack complexity? How difficult is it for an attacker to mount this attack? Things like that. And you can see that we can predict all these with fairly high accuracy. Not in all cases. There are some things we're not able to predict well as yet. But we can predict most of them with about 70% or more accuracy, and several of them with even higher accuracy. I'm going to show you a little demonstration of our system through a little video clip for about 2 minutes.
Given a vulnerability, the vulnerability exploitation scoring and timing tool looks at the vulnerability and predicts when it'll be exploited and how severe the vulnerability is. You can see on this screen a histogram showing the number of vulnerabilities reported per day. We can zoom in if we wish on certain time frames as well. If we click on this link, we go to a new screen, which we will show momentarily. This screen shows VEST forecasts. Each gray node in this chart shows a CVE. For example, this gray node here shows a CVE assigned on January 2nd, 2018. When we click on this gray node, we get a line. This line shows us the date on which VEST made a prediction about the CVSS score. On Jan 12, 2018, VEST predicted a CVSS score of 7.82. The true CVSS score was assigned by NIST on June 20th, more than 5 months later, and was 7.5, almost the same. We can therefore see that VEST does a very good job in predicting the CVSS score. Clicking on this node brings us a new graph. We can see this new graph by looking at a set of red nodes denoting CVEs and green nodes denoting tweets. When we click on a CVE, such as this one, we see a whole bunch of information about it. This information includes the predicted date that VEST thinks the CVE will be exploited, 162 days. It predicts the CVSS score that we predict, 7.53 compared to the true CVSS score of 7.5. And it provides a whole bunch of more fine-grained predictions associated with the CVSS score. This suggests that VEST provides a high-quality prediction capability across different kinds of scores as well as timings. Thank you.
So thank you for listening to the VEST part of this talk, threat intelligence and predictive modeling of future threats. I'm going to move from here to another very important question, the second of my 2 case studies. And this deals with intellectual property theft. We're all used to seeing tons of newspaper headlines, such as these shown here. How, Chinese officials, Russians are hacking and stealing data, intellectual property, etc., from the United States. This is a very complicated problem, and we're interested in the question of imposing costs and deterring actors who steal intellectual property. And to do this, we must first note one important thing. A report from Symantec published a few years ago says that based on the telemetry they've observed, extensive telemetry, that on average, there is a gap of 312 days between the time an attacker has successfully compromised an enterprise through a zero-day attack and the time that that company, the victim, discovers that attack. That's a huge gap, almost 10 years. I'm sorry, 10 months, over 10 months. And during this time, the hackers can steal whatever intellectual property they want at will. They can steal a little bit at a time, they can steal a lot of it, but they have ample opportunity to explore the system, move laterally through it, find out what else there is that they're not thought to steal to start with, and get everything they can get their hands on. So if you're a company or the CISO of a company or work for the security organization of a company that has intellectual property that it generates and that wants to protect it, say you're a Lockheed Martin, you don't want to have your stuff stolen. And so what we try to do is to come up with a solution that says, hey, if you're a Lockheed Martin, as an example only, I'm using Lockheed Martin. If you're a Lockheed Martin inventor and you're working on, say, a new engine for stealth fighters, then you want to use a system such as ours to automatically and scalably generate fake versions of technical documents. And you want to do this in such a way that the fake documents are realistic enough so that an adversary who looks at them is going to find them believable. In fact, he may have to work fairly hard to figure out if it's real or fake. And that's what we want him to have to do. That imposes costs on him. It makes him spend time, which gains us time, and it makes him waste time and money in doing this. It also adds to frustration on the part of the technical experts employed by the adversary, by the bad guy. In addition, however, we would like these technical documents to be sufficiently wrong. They've got to be sufficiently different from the original that the designs they purportedly contain are incorrect. And what does this mean? It means that if the adversary were to by mistake choose an incorrect design and execute on it, it's likely to have significant costs for him and likely to literally, blow up in his face. So 6 months later, he spent a lot of money, he's wasted a lot of time, and things didn't work. So that's our goal. But even if he figures out which the real one is and which the fake one is, he will still have difficulty telling real from fake apart, and he'll still be uncertain when he starts executing these fake designs whether he got the right one. So we want to be able to automatically generate such documents from scratch in the case of technical documents. But just to keep things simple for a moment, I want to show you some very simple sentences taken from restaurant reviews, movie reviews, and titles of scientific papers. And I'd like everybody to pause for a moment and stare at these. Some of these are real, some of them are fake. And as you look at these, think in your own head, which one is real, which one is fake. Okay, so the next slide, this slide that you see now, shows you in red everything that's fake. So you can see that we were able to generate automatically something which said authentic tasting sauce, fresh crust, which could well be a review of a pizzeria. We've got something that says, which is fake, which says Russell Crowe's direction is far too predictable. I'm not by any means suggesting that the sentence is true, but the sentence could plausibly occur in a movie review, and so forth. So how can you do this at scale? Not for single, very short sentences or short phrases or short reviews, but for deep technical articles which people write in the Lockheed Martins, the Pfizers, and the BMWs of the world. We're going to start with an original document, a real document which somebody's working on, and our framework, Forge, which stands for Fake Online Repository Generation Engine, first looks at the document, does NLP to extract candidate concepts that appear in this document, not just necessarily words, but concepts. It then merges some of these concepts together because multiple concepts might overlap. And then a lot of concepts are useless from the point of view of conveying information about the technical content of the document, so we want to get rid of those. So this is what I would say a bunch of standard NLP pipeline that's used here. After this, we developed two kinds of networks, something called a multi-layer network, which takes the concepts that have survived this process and generates two kinds of networks out of it. It puts two concepts together and links them together in one network if they appear close enough to each other. It suggests that if two concepts are frequently co-occurring in the document near each other, they're probably well related. And then it also analyzes these concepts semantically and connects those concepts that are semantically close to each other also together. And it links this network and this network, these two networks together as well. From this, we compute something called the metacentrality of each concept. And what it is intuitively is a measure of the importance of the concept to the document. Obviously, we don't want to take a very, very important concept, such as, say, a tungsten alloy that's used in, say, some engine, and replace it with, say, the word cardboard, which would be ludicrous to use in an engine. So what we want to do when we replace words or concepts in documents with other concepts is to make sure that they're sufficiently close to the original. So, aluminum alloy might be better than cardboard as a replacement for tungsten alloy, but we should not be replacing concepts that are so central that it would be easy for an adversary to figure out quickly that a very, very central concept has been replaced. Once we do that, we use an ontology to generate fake documents automatically. And there's a human in the loop, if needed, process where the expert, perhaps the person who authored this document or some member of his team, can look at the fake documents and provide some feedback to the system that gets incorporated not only in generating a better version of his fake documents, but in general gets incorporated into the system as a whole. And after that, a number of fakes get generated. How does this work? Forge starts with the original document here, and it tries to generate documents that are sufficiently believable. So this red line here measures the distance between a document, the original document, and the fakes that are shown arranged in the circle around it. And we don't want this distance to be too large. That is, it should be inside this outer circle, because if it's not inside this outer circle, it's too far away from the original document and is likely to be easily detected as fake by the adversary. At the same time, we don't want it to be too similar to the original. That is, it should not be inside this inner circle, inner dotted circle, because if it is, it's not likely to be wrong. So we want it to be somewhere between this outer circle and this inner circle. So you can think of this as a donut-shaped region, which is where it's in. How does Forge work? Forge works by first identifying key concepts in this document. Then it selects concepts to replace from this document using an analysis of the metacentrality of the document. And then it uses an ontology to replace these concepts by good replacement concepts, which are likely to be wrong. And then it tries to identify all this by solving a massive optimization problem. I'm not interested in going through the details of that for this brief talk, but you're welcome to contact me if you would like more information on that. Our experiments show that in over 90% of the cases, subjects with technical expertise select the wrong document when they are presented with the original document and a set of fakes. And this suggests that our system is able to generate, pretty good fake documents. Let me conclude my talk by saying a few words about where we expect things to go from here. So I've shown you how technical documents can be faked, but in the future, we can expect to see fake profiles of people's accounts on social media. These will contain not just bot-generated text, such as some of those I've shown before in these slides, but also actual generation of account profiles that are completely fake. They will include fake images of the person. This is a list of fake, a nice picture of a bunch of fake images that have been developed by third parties, but fake demographics of those people, fake descriptions, as well as fake follower-followee friend networks associated with them. We will see fake post-generated tweets, emails, and these will not just be text. These will not just be images, but combinations of images, text, audio. And finally, we expect that over the next few years, these kinds of fake generation techniques, while they can be used for good, such as by identifying and deterring IP theft, they can also be used for malicious purposes by malicious actors. So for example, we expect that accounts influenced in influence campaigns will include a mix of real humans, cyber accounts, which are partly automated and part human controlled, bots, etc. So what we are at today is the start of a major change in how AI is reshaping the security architecture and landscape that we see around us. I'd like to say in conclusion, as a final note, that the term AI, artificial intelligence, was first invented at Dartmouth in 1956 in a famous AI summer research workshop held here, which had luminaries such as John McCarthy, one of the founders of AI, who was then a professor at Dartmouth, as well as others like Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, and yet others. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us. If you could stop sharing your slides so that we can give you a big virtual round of applause. All right. If you're looking for your next session, you can go ahead and check your agenda to see where you're going next, or take some time to connect with our awesome sponsors, or do some virtual networking with your peers. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.